I mean, it does mess with your head, though, because there's actually a story about John Titor. Have you ever heard of this guy?
No.
Okay, so John Titor, I'm going to hear, because I don't remember all the details about him, but he's one of those stories that I would say, even though many people said that this guy is not credible, it's whatever, BS, he's one of those stories where I would say, there's something to it. There's something to it as opposed to like being complete BS. So basically, in the year 2000,
he didn't just crawl from under his kitchen sink and meet himself, did he?
Exactly. No, it's not that just like weird, right? So basically, this guy in the year 2000, right, a guy calling himself John Titor, basically you could say showed up suddenly on the internet and announced that he's a time traveler from year 2036. So. And then of course people are like, whatever thing, and it's interesting because the way he did it is he was on a forum. I forget now which forum it was, but I remember I came across it already after he was gone.
Probably like Reddit or 4chan or
something. Yeah, but it was like again year 2000, so I don't even know if those were around, but something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I remember I think that forum was actually still around, so you can still actually see all the original things that he wrote, things that people wrote to him. Because if I find it, I'll put it in the link in the description. But there's actually a book that I'm also been like kind of referencing called "Who Authored the John Titor Legend." It's on Amazon. Again, I'll provide the link. Okay. But basically, what I found interesting is when somebody told me like, "Oh, this dude shows up on a forum and claims he's from the future," and nobody ever saw his face, never uploaded any pictures, or it's just text, just him typing and thing. I just thought, okay, well, it's easy to just claim anything, and nobody knows anything, and I don't know about where you're from.
I could say the same shit. Yeah.
What I found interesting, though, is, and I think that's where most people haven't done that, is I actually went, I remember it was years ago, but it was, I think, 2004 or 2005, like when I heard about it. And I remember that I found the forum, and I found all the posts there. And essentially started reading through it, a lot of it, because it went on for, I think it was for like a year. And he, introduced himself very casually, this and that. Some people started asking questions. Many people just ridiculed him, right? And he pretty much just said right off the bat, well, I don't really care about convincing any of you. That's not what I'm here for. So somebody asked him, what are you here for? And he said he's been sent back to 1975 to retrieve an IBM computer. It says IBM 5100 computer for something that it's needed for something in the future, in the year 2036. Essentially, he said he was sent as part of this military mission. He's from year 2036, where U.S. has gone through sort of you could say a global war, like a nuclear war, but also civil war. He described certain of the events. He said he's I think he was from Florida. Claimed that it was kind of pretty much like martial law, but it was better than some other parts of the United States. That U.S., I believe China and Russia got involved. It was like a big nuclear blowout. He doesn't know what happened to the other countries, like information's of everything. And I just thought to myself, it's like a good post-apocalyptic kind of story, right? It didn't take my thing. What I found interesting about his story is that he was the first one to kind of then say, because when people started asking him, like I think it started with like somebody on the forum asked him, like, oh, so if you're from the future, then who wins the World Series this year, something like that. And he started like laughing, and he said, why would I bother remembering the who wins every major sports concept, from 30 something years, in my past. When first of all, I didn't even know if I'm going there. I didn't care if I'm going, I wouldn't care about remembering such information. And he said, and in my timeline, he said, there is no sports, like major sports anymore. It's just basically the world. We have other bigger problems to worry about. So when he said that, and then he said, even if I told you, he said, doesn't mean that it would come true, because essentially I'm creating a new timeline right now. So by being here, I'm already affecting it. And by discussing things and altering your decisions or whatever, I'm already creating a new timeline. So it's not going to be the exact same timeline thing. So in my timeline, maybe these guys won or that guy won. And said if I already cared about it and try to remember all that information, then I could relay it. But again, that could have already changed, or I could have in some small way affected it, or other people who traveled in time could have affected it. So and that was the first time I ever heard of that concept, that it was multiple timelines. Another interesting thing was that he said, because kind of how he like went back to the 70s, because he was supposed to go to 1975, and then he went to the thing, and pretty much made it sound like he just did not want to be part of this military experiment. So he's kind of hiding in the year 2000, but he said he's probably going to be discovered pretty quickly anyways, and he'll have to run. And he said he can run to a completely like something like an alternate timeline, because the time machine that he had used, and he kind of described it in one of the posts, I remember. But he basically said it's very primitive technology, meaning the longer or the more you want to go into the future or into the past from the current time, the less accurate it is. If you travel like really things, so basically you got to go faster. Again, you got to somehow traverse through space faster, and that causes it to be less accurate. And he said, but we already know of other beings from this planet, he described, that are far, far more advanced, and they're from both of our futures, because they've already visited us in our time, and they're already here in your times, he said. And they have much more superior technology, but they're saying that we're not capable of, we're not responsible, so they, at our current state of development, so they can't share that technology with us.
Because so this it went from time travel to aliens.
Well, not really, because he's pretty much saying that they're basically humans, but just so far advanced that they guess they might be like aliens, but they're ours, like they're our descendants.
Okay.
But they, I guess, develop something. So, for me, I remember I got into it and I started reading this whole thing, making notes, because I make films. So I was right away like, it could be a cool story for a film, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of good ideas in there.
Yeah. So that's kind of why.
Even if it's a lie, it's
exactly.
That person's pretty good, pretty creative, I should say.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, that I think, I'm glad in a way that I don't have this judgmental and like, I guess, very ridiculing mind where I'm like, I read something or hear about something and I go, it's bullshit, whatever. And I'm not even going to look into it, because I feel like if you're a filmmaker especially, but if you're writing books, coming up with stories, I think you have to be open to really crazy ideas, because you never know. Some of these ideas, like, I've done this film called NWO, United We Stand, which is a really far-fetched story too. And it actually was from one of these forums. I just read a whole bunch of these conspiracy theories. I kind of put them together. I thought that some were interesting and this and that. And I made a film, went viral on the internet, and Alex Jones actually bought it off of me, and he had it on on his channel and all that stuff, website before he got banned on the internet. So like, it's you never know. Like, it's just sometimes you can get really cool original ideas by looking at this, basically what at the first glance seems like a really crazy out there story. So to me, I'm still not going to say that I'm convinced that John Titor is a real time traveler, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of, like, another thing that really made me stop and think is because he kept on saying over and over, kind of almost like laughing, but almost saying like, I feel sad that you guys don't realize that how basically that you kind of like don't realize how much of a lie you're living. He's saying you're totally not aware, and this is again year 2000. Most people didn't talk about things like that. Where he says, you guys are not aware where your food comes from. You're not even aware of what you're eating, how unhealthy all this stuff is. It says we in the future we wish we had access to some of these things that you guys have, because but we had to learn to be kind of more reliant on that stuff. And we're also, I guess, after the whole nuclear fallout or whatever, he claims, it's really bad. And I just simply thought to myself, like, well, that's like, an interesting thing. Another thing he said was that somebody asked him, like, well, how come you don't have all this information about, because they're asking him about what happens on the part of the world or this and that. And he says that the internet really blows up and then it just completely gets shattered because of some of these events. And some of the things, so he said that, and then another thing he said is people completely stopped trusting mainstream media, news organizations, things like that. And again, in the year 2000, everybody trusted everything. Now think about it. I mean, CNN, Fox, all these things, like they're dying. Mainstream media is dying. Even when it comes to entertainment, a lot of it is dying. It's all just
Exactly.
original content creators, right? Who are doing stuff like, like our podcast or whatever that people are turning into. And that's another interesting thing. Somebody asked him, goes, well, so how can you, how do you find out news? And he goes, well, you hear about it, he said, through the internet, but it's hearing it directly from people, from their experience. And I was like, okay. And I remember, I also, at that time, and again, when I heard about it, I think it was around 2004, it was hard for me to grasp that, because I was like, I worked at that point on a big studio film. And it just seemed to me, how could these big studios and big projects, how could they be made by small time, by independent creators? How could news be replaced? It just did not gel with me at all. Now, of course, we're seeing the early stages of that. I mean, there's some incredible animated films even, or independent films that were produced with no money. There's a lot of people who just literally, they have a cell phone and they start broadcasting online, and they have really big, successful news networks. And literally, I think the top guy on Facebook now has got millions of views every week. He's forget his name, Bongino or something. He's literally, I think now, I'm pretty sure now he's advanced, or upgraded his equipment, but he just started with his cell phone, and he just literally was the reporting, his honest opinion and what he heard about different world events, and people start turning to him. It's like people don't want all this overproduced crap and everything. So anyways, that's what I found interesting about John Titor, the heat thing. And then, of course, he did talk about something about that there's a big event coming, and he said it's one of these, so he called it an anchor event, that this thing can't be changed, but that will start the whole, I think he might have even said awakening process, or it will basically make people stop and kind of rethink a lot of what they, view as their reality, as their, the way that the world works. And of course, and then he disappeared in the beginning of 2001. And of course, a few months later was 9/11, which kind of shook the whole world, right? And after 9/11, all these big changes in travel came, and all these, accusations of corruptions between different governments, including the U.S. government, all these crazy things happened. So, again, he could have just been lucky, and he could have just predicted he could say something like that. Again, he was so he didn't specify the time. He didn't say exactly what was going to happen. So at the same time, it's like I could say something like, something big is coming. Something so big, it's going to, I don't know, it's going to make everybody think. And it's like, okay, maybe in a year from now, something will happen, or 2 years. And some people will say, see, he warned us about it. It's like, well,
yeah, it's too vague.
Exactly. It's so vague that I think, so, so that's what I'm saying. I don't necessarily believe that John Titor was a real guy who traveled back in time, but I would say it's one of the, when you really read the posts and you kind of just are at least willing to suspend your belief or reality, then it really does, it's one of the more credible stories, to me.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe look into that one.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to provide the links for you guys, but